us. So my clock now says 10:05 in Denver. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We have about 14 people on the line total. My name is Michelle Sarche, and just wanted to welcome you all today and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us and hear a little bit about what we have in mind for the work of the Tribal Early Childhood Research Center across the next 4 years, but really today we're going to focus on year one. So let's see here. Our goals for today are really to take a closer look. It's probably the first time that many of you have had a chance to hear some detailed information on what we had proposed for the next 4 years of the TRC in terms of partners, areas of emphasis, and activities. And again, we're going to really zero in on what's happening in year one so that you all can consider ways that you might want to get involved in the TRC. And so some specific ways that you could get involved that we'll be talking about today include being a member of the TRC Steering Committee, joining some of the TRC communities of learning that will be getting underway, attending TRC conferences, and really that is the Native Children's Research Exchange that will be happening here in Denver in September, but TRC members will also be participating in a variety of conferences that you all will be at already, and we'll talk a little bit more about that today too, as well as TRC training opportunities. So first things first, just wanted to thank all of you, most of you on the call today, and we'll go over who is on the call today in just a minute, but most of you have been our long-term partners. Some of you have been working with us since we first started this work back in 2005, and so many of you offered letters of support in the application process. I think we had about 70 letters of support, and we're just so grateful for your partnership through the years and really feeling just looking forward to what we can do in the years coming up. So thank you. Again, we know you are all so busy, and this is often added to your plates, or you make room on your plates for your involvement with us. So I wanted to start out by talking about our TRC partners. TRC partnership is really at the core of what we do. So first I wanted to start with our TRC university partners. So I'm here at the University of Colorado, Anschutz Medical Campus in Aurora, Colorado. And many of you have had a chance to visit our offices, our buildings here. This is where we host the NCRE conference in September. And so along with me here at the University of Colorado is Nancy Whitesell, Nancy Asdigian, who was on our call last week. And just the color coding here shows who's on the call today is in blue, and brown are people who were with us last week. And we know not everybody could join either one of these calls. And so just as an aside, we are recording today, and we will make that recording available to anybody who would like it, but especially those who couldn't join either one of our calls. And we have Brad Morse here with us today. Candace Fleming is a member of our team. She's not able to join us. Doug Novins will be joining us today. And then Caitlin Truxas, also she's out in the field, was out in the field last week and this week, so wasn't able to join us. So we here at the University of Colorado are the home base for the TRC, but we couldn't make the TRC happen without the close partnerships that we're so honored to have with our university partners. We have Jessica Barnes and Hy Fitzgerald, who are both on the call today from Michigan State University. They've been working with us since 2005. And then Allison Barlow, John Walkup, and Nicole Perret at the Johns Hopkins Center for American Indian Health. They were partners with us throughout the last 5 years of the TRC since 2011. And then new to the next 4 years are Kathy Ayoub and Josh Sparrow, who I think many of you know from the Brazelton Touchpoint Center. Their team has been especially involved in tribal home visiting work, but lots of other tribal work, including Launch, and Josh has been a presenter, I know, at NICA and NISHA as well. So we're really excited to be partnering with our university partners. And then at ACF is the federal agency that has sponsored the work of the TRC since, again, 2005, really. And there's various divisions and groups within ACF, and these are all the groups that we interface with and work with. OPRE is our ACF home for the TRC, and our program officer is Nikki Denmark. She's somewhat new to ACF, but she was at NCRE last fall, and we look forward to working with her. Alita Meyer will remain involved. She was our project officer of the last 5 years, to be involved. And then Meryl Borofsky, who many of you know, is also involved and has a particular emphasis on the work that we'll be doing with the AIAN Head Start FACES data that we'll talk a little bit about today. And then these are the other folks at ACF who have been close partners over the years. And on the phone today, I believe we have W.J. Strickland is joining us from the Office of Head Start. And at ANA, we have Diana Gates and Ariel Richer. So our tribal program partners, that is many of you today, in tribal child care programs, tribal Head Start, and tribal home visiting are really the heart of the TRC. And we, again, are so honored that you all make time for us. And so on the call today, hold on, are the folks in blue. We've got Tammy Charles and Kim Nall from Child Care, Ann Cameron, Lana Garcia, Teresa Smith, and Mavini Verdugo representing Tribal Head Start. And then from the Tribal Home Visiting partners, we have Lisa Abramson, Kathy Farron, Katie Hess, Vanessa Hiratsuka, Amanda Leonard, and Sophia Tuala-Lieras. And again, welcome everybody. And we also have a set of academic partners to our work, as well as organizational partners. And so our academic partners are those who are listed here. And then on the call today, we have Alice Carter, who's done some work with us on the Infant Toddler Social Emotional Assessment, or the ITSE. Bob MD, who's been a senior scientific advisor to our group for a very long time and has a lot of heart and dedication to work with tribal communities. He's been a partner on various projects, not just the TRC, for many years here. And we have Melissa Walls at the University of Minnesota Duluth, and Amy West, who's at the University of Illinois in Chicago, both Native researchers. Melissa's a sociologist, and Amy is a clinical psychologist. And again, we've partnered with them in a variety of ways and look forward to involving our academic partners more closely moving forward. And then we really considered it during the application process, who are the organizational partners that we need to continue our partnerships with, and as well as some folks that are new. And so these are our organizational partners. NICA, PATH, let me start from the top, the Programmatic Assistance for Tribal Home Visiting, and Maria Gale. We have worked a lot with the Cherokee Nation IRB. They're one of the few tribal IRBs in the country, and they've just served as advisors, basically, to some of the work we've done, particularly around the AIN FACES work. TEI, or the Tribal Home Visiting Evaluation Institute, And then NICA and NISHDA, the professional organizations representing tribal childcare and tribal home visiting, really want to continue to work closely with those groups. NCAI, American Indian College Fund, Dr. Tara-Jean Yazzie-Mintz, who many of you have had a chance to meet. And then the National Center on Tribal Early Childhood Development is a new partner. They are housing the TA Center for Tribal Childcare in particular. And so Melody Redbird Post has been also involved in the TRC for a number of years, but brings some new partners to the table in her work at that National Center. And then we have Lisa Malone from Mathematica Policy Research, and Mathematica is a group that has carried out the AIN FACES study. So we're really excited, we have a lot of shared interests across all of these groups and partners. So moving on. So this is just a map. It's not necessarily, I don't know that I've placed all the stars in exactly the right places, but it's close, and it's just really a visual to share that the work of the TRC and our partnerships are really national in scope. And so those stars represent all of you, all of our stakeholder, all of our partners. So any questions so far, or any comments or anything anyone would like to share on the partners? Well, I'm just going to keep rolling then. So I was going to start by orienting everyone to the TRC areas of emphasis. This is a figure that we've had the chance to share with some of you when we were in the application process last summer. And it's just a guiding figure that kind of visually puts together all of the pieces of the TRC. So again, at the center, and we just went through, specific members, specific partners within each of these broader groups of tribal program partners. Again, most closely, that's Head Start, home visiting, and child care, academic partners, our ACF partners, and organizational partners. And there at the center is where we all come together to explore our shared interests in these broad areas of emphasis. And we'll talk a little bit about specific activities within these broader areas of emphasis. But the TRC of the next 4 years will be engaging in some pilot research, some measure development, some training and professional development. Communities of learning are really one of the core manifestations of our partnership between the university-based researchers who are those partners that I mentioned on one of those earlier slides, working closely with tribal program partners and organizational partners and ACF partners to carry out the work in ways that are most meaningful is our goal for tribal children, families, and communities. And then forums for tribal voices and research is also an important area of emphasis. And again, this work of the TRC of the next 4 years really builds on the work that we've been engaged in starting back in 2005. So this slide just goes over at a pretty high level within the areas of emphasis of pilot research, measure development, training, and professional development, some of the broad level activities that we'll be engaging in the next 4 years. So as I move on to the next slides and turn this over to some of my colleagues, you'll hear some more detail on these. But within pilot research, we will be doing some work that will continue what had been started with the survey of well-being of young children that many of you were involved in, related to developmental screeners and their validity, their appropriateness for use within tribal contexts. So we'll be doing, Nancy will be talking about that in a little bit. We will also be building off of the work that a number of you were involved with in terms of the Tribal Early Childhood Needs Assessment pilot. We're really not going to get into that today because that's an out-year project. And then around measure development, just to say that many of us struggle to find measures that we are confident work and are appropriate for use in tribal contexts. And so that's true for researchers. It's true for people running early childhood programs. And so the TRC hopes to continue to address some of the gaps in that measure development area. One of the things that we're engaging in that Brad will be talking about today is putting together a compendium or a collection of early childhood measures and commenting in that compendium on what kind of confidence we can have in their appropriateness for use in tribal contexts. So he'll be talking about that in a minute. We'll be doing some secondary analysis of those AIAN FACES data. And we'll also be able to use some of the data from the Developmental Screener Validation Methods pilot to do some measurement work there. Nancy will touch on that in a little bit. And then in terms of training and professional development in the odd years, so this summer of 2017, and then again in 2019, TRC will again be partnering closely with our colleagues at Johns Hopkins Center for American Indian Health to host a summer institute, and so we'll talk more about what that is. And then we're again going to be hosting the Native Children's Research Exchange here in September. We'll have some details on that in a little bit. And we'll also start hosting some quarterly webinars, probably starting in year 2. And then over on the right is just to show that forums for tribal voices and communities of learning are really cross-cut all of these proposed activities. So again, as I said when we started, we really wanted to invite you. One of the main goals of this call today is for you all to consider ways that you might be interested in getting involved in the work of the TRC. And so highlighted in blue are the things that we're really going to dig into today. And then Jessica is going to be sending out a follow-up survey so that you can indicate what you're most interested in. So I said, the communities of learning and forums for tribal voices cross-cut all of these areas. But I just wanted to point out that those communities of learning are really going to be connected to the things where you see some arrows right there. And then the forums for tribal voices are probably most connected to some of our training and professional development activities, as well as the steering committee. So I wanted to start with the TRC Steering Committee as one of the ways that you all could consider getting involved in the TRC. So many of you, perhaps all of you in terms of our tribal program partners who are on the call today, were steering committee members before. And how we had structured it in the TRC of the last 5 years was we had 3 separate steering committees. We had a Head Start, Home Visiting, and Child Care Steering Committee. And there were various opportunities for all 3 of those groups to meet together over the years. Sometimes it was 2 of the 3. But really moving forward, we want to have one joint steering committee. And so just to give you a sense, and again, this is reflects, I guess, how honored we are to have the opportunity to connect with so many of you. But our Head Start Steering Committee over the years grew to probably about 28 people. Home Visiting had about 26, and Child Care had about 12. And those are just really hard to support in terms of being able to cover travel for everybody to attend a meeting in person at least once a year. And for those of you who've participated in meetings remotely by phone, you know it's just not the same. And so one group that had been left out because our resources were limited for supporting travel
were our academic partners. Even though they were partners all along, it was just really challenging to feel integrated and part of the group if you didn't have those opportunities for in-person connection. So moving forward, as I said, we're planning for a single joint steering committee that would have representation across all three of those groups, as well as the academic and organizational and other partners, and I'll get to that in just a second. And it really also, not just because of the travel piece, but it also, I think, represents the TRC being a place that, regardless of what program you may represent, the TRC is a place for, it's not the only place, but it is a place to reflect on shared early childhood interests that really cross-cut the different types of programs you all are involved in. And, as such, really supports cross-program dialogue with respect to what we can do in the research arena to better serve those programs, children and families. And again, it increases the feasibility with respect to travel support to attend meetings in person. So just to get really concrete here in terms of what we are thinking the steering committee would look like, we would be looking for representation from tribal child care directors, Head Start directors, home visiting program directors or evaluators, so the same kinds of people who were on those three separate steering committees before. We also would like to add tribal college faculty and academic or research partners, and we can think strategically also about what it might look like to have some of our organizational partners either as steering committee members or as others who would be part of communities of learning, et cetera. But this is about the number of people we're looking for from each of those groups. And I just wanted to say that, again, the steering committee is not the only way to be involved with the TRC. And so that's what the follow-up survey will be, is to think about how each of you would like to be involved, whether it's the steering committee or the communities of learning that we'll talk about in a second. So on our last call, one of our long-term partners also raised the issue that I think is true not only for the steering committee, but in general for the TRC, and that is how do we continue to grow our network and bring in new voices into the work of the TRC, so others outside of our existing network who are newer voices with respect to tribal Head Start, home visiting, or child care. And so we're really going to be looking to all of you perhaps for some, as a starting point, for recommendations about your colleagues who've not been involved in TRC that you really think should get involved. And so our steering committee meetings, sorry about that. We have been moving in the last 5 years to plan those steering committee meetings in conjunction with other national meetings. It both, capitalizes on travel that people may already be doing. It also provides travel opportunities for people to get to conferences that they may not have been able to get to otherwise. So our first meeting is actually coming up really soon on April 3rd, and that is right on the heels of the International Meeting for Indigenous Child Health that's hosted here in Denver. And then we'll host our next steering committee meeting on September 20th, the 27th, the day before NCRE here in Denver. And then we'll host a meeting in July 2018 in conjunction with the ACF National Research Conference on Early Childhood. It's a free conference and could use a lot more tribal representation at that meeting. And so together, once we have our steering committee formed, I think together we will put our heads together to really define what is the role of the steering committee in guiding the TRC work in the next 4 years. So Any thoughts, questions, reflections? Okay. I am going to hand this over to Nancy. So now we're moving into talking about the communities of learning that the TRC will be supporting and facilitating, especially starting up in year one. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Nancy.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Working with the new phone and making sure I'm off mute.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm going to tell you a little bit about one of the two pilot studies that we proposed, and this is the one that we're planning to get underway, as Michelle said, immediately. And this pilot study builds on the work that we did back between about 2012 and 2015 that was led by the SWIC Community of Learning. And SWIC, for those of you who haven't heard that before, is the Survey of Well-Being of Young Children. And it's a screener designed to be able to pick up potential problems in development or social emotional functioning among children birth to 5, and was designed to be a pretty quick. It's short. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes for parents to complete the screener. It's designed to be freely and easily accessible, easy to score. And so back then, we took the question to tribal communities about sort of the feasibility of using the SWIC within early childhood programs. It was designed to be used in pediatricians' offices, but as we know, a lot of children in tribal communities don't have the opportunity to get to those regular well-child checks with pediatricians, and so we were also exploring those alternative means of reaching children and identifying children that might need additional evaluation or services. And one of the things that came out of that was the recognition that we really need to better understand how screeners like the SWIC work in tribal communities with young American Indian, Alaska Native children, and we really don't know. And there are a lot of other screeners that are being utilized, and a lot of other measures in general that are being utilized. Some examples are the ASQ, which I think a lot of programs use to screen young children. But there's a lot of questioning about the appropriateness of those tools and whether or not they miss things with tribal children or over-identify problems just because of the sort of misfit in some of the items. So the goals of this sort of next step, we've been thinking we really need to have a study that looks at the validity of these instruments, how well they really do work in tribal contexts. And so this pilot study that we're going to be launching soon is to explore sort of the methods for collecting the kind of data that we would need to be able to answer those questions about how well the screeners work. So we don't have the time or the budget to do a full-on validation study, and it's a little bit premature to do that because we don't quite know exactly how to best go about that. So the goals of this pilot study would be to really develop methodology for doing that and work with one or two tribal communities as it says here, in collaboration and partnership with the communities to sort of figure out what's the best way to go about collecting the information that we would need, pilot the methods for data collection of a range of screening measures to establish what we call concurrent validity. So do these different screeners agree with one another? But that still leaves the question of, do they actually predict, or are they actually related to children's actual functioning? And in order to understand that, we also need to do some more intensive developmental assessments of children in tribal communities. And so we would administer the screeners to a broader sample of children and then do a developmental assessment on a subsample to make sure that those screeners are in fact pointing to the actual levels of functioning in children. And then the fourth goal you'll see here is through sort of figuring out these methods, we could then better estimate the actual cost of a full validation study, which would give us the information about how well these measures are actually working. So those are the sort of the overall goals of this. And also I should back up. We need a better name for this. Developmental Screeners Validation Method Pilot is very descriptive and very accurate about what we're doing, but it's a mouthful. And so that's why I've been joking. That's our first order of business with the community of learning, is to come up with a better name for this project. But anyway, those are the overall goals. And if we go on to the next slide, this is just, back to, as Michelle was saying, the community of learning is really the approach that we're taking for all of the work we're doing in TRC. And so we see the community of learning that will be formed around this is really critical in helping to design and implement and interpret and disseminate the findings of this project. So I outlined just briefly our initial thoughts about what this study would look like, but we would really like to get a community of learning convened soon so that we can share those ideas, get input from partners on that community of learning, and finalize a design and begin to think about communities that we would engage as partners for this and how do we move forward. And we have already reached out to folks who participated in the SWIC community of learning and have gotten sort of gauged interest and availability of those folks, but we're also really hoping to engage some other folks in this work. And as Michelle said, this goes back to, we want to work with our sort of continuing partnerships, but we also want to make sure we are open to bring in new thoughts and new ideas. So this is one of the things that when you get the survey after this webinar, you'll have an opportunity to indicate interest in participating on this community of learning. So we'd like you to consider that. And just in terms of time frame, we're really hoping to begin meetings. February is probably a bit optimistic because of the time it takes to get everyone's schedules aligned, but at least in March to get this project underway, and would probably be holding certainly monthly meetings as we get this ramped up, and with probably some email contact and interaction in between those monthly meetings to move things forward. With the idea that we would be ready to begin collecting data sometime later this year. And of course, we'll have to go through all of the approval processes in the meantime. So this next slide just shows kind of what our preliminary plans are. We're hoping to enroll about 72 families. We had initially proposed one tribal site just because of budget limitations, but we're thinking about, is there a possibility that we could perhaps identify 2 sites in close proximity to each other, and that way sort of maximize our travel dollars and be able to explore how methods might work in a reservation context and also an urban context. We would be working with site coordinators at each site, utilizing TRC staff to come in and administer screeners, and then really would need to engage developmental experts to do those culturally informed developmental assessments. So that's our preliminary plan, but we really would look forward to having partners join us in thinking through the best way to do this and how to move forward with this work.
Thank you, Nancy.
Mm-hmm.
So any questions or comments for Nancy? Okay.
This is Bob. Is the idea to modify current instruments or develop a new instrument?
The idea with this study is to take the current instruments that are out there and that are being used in a lot of tribal communities and just look at them and examine how well they are working in this population. So because there are a lot of programs that are required to do screenings and are using a lot of instruments, but we've heard a lot, and in the SWIC study we heard a lot, there's a lot of skepticism about how well they're actually capturing what's happening with children in tribal communities. So the goal of this is really just to understand how trustworthy they are, the screeners are, and look at how they align with a very careful assessment of children.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're going to turn it over to our colleague here in Denver, Brad Morse, who's going to talk about the Tribal Early Childhood measures compendium.
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning, everybody. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today to talk about the development of the new compendium. The new compendium is really developing out of our experience and lessons learned from the compendium that we had for the first go-around of the TRC funding. And we're really going to take those lessons learned to heart and try to create a better resource for all of our research colleagues to access different measures that will be helpful to them in their research and answering important questions. So just some high-level things that I can this morning is that the tribal early childhood measures will live at that address that you see on the screen today. And right now, if you follow through on that URL, you would land on a page. It says that the page is now under construction, and the under construction synopsis sort of says what I just told all of you on the call today, that we're looking to improve some things going around for the version 2.0, as you may call it. Could you step back? Thank you, Michelle. So some of the very important priorities in the redesign are, firstly, easy and member-free access. For the first go-around, we felt that it was important to protect the integrity of the measures and to make sure that whoever was accessing the measures was doing so in a way that would be consistent with the rules around using those measures if they were, if you needed to buy copies or paper forms or anything like that. We found that that was sort of an obstacle to getting people really involved with this set of resources, and so we've decided that, to put it plainly, that the responsibility will be on the part of the user to follow through for any of those measures, to contact whoever publishes those measures to purchase them if that's what is needed. And some of that information will be found in the description of the measures when you get down to the measure level to find out the details of whether or not it's been used in American Indian communities, for example. Another thing that we'd like to improve on is how intuitive the navigation really is. I was just speaking with Nancy Whitesell this morning about envisioning what this website will look like. And my hope is to really build something out that has a lot of white real estate on it. What that means is that it won't have a lot of images. There will be some images, and we'll use visuals and videos in certain ways, but the navigation is going to be very simple. The eye won't have to wander far to be able to know how to get to a certain measure you may be looking for, depending on what questions you're asking. We'd like to expand the list of measures, and this was a bit cumbersome in version 1.0. We had to work through a resource center here on campus at the University of Colorado, and the time lapse between finding out about a new measure and getting it added into the compendium was just frankly too long. And so we want to be really responsive, and that's another thing, speaking of that point. We want to be responsive to what our colleagues are using. If they find a new measure, if they find a study that used a measure that belongs in the compendium, we want to build into the website mechanisms which will facilitate that kind of communication. In other words, we're really looking for a way to crowdsource some of this information and get people to help us build the compendium so it can be a resource for our field. And another high-level navigational point I'd like to make is the links to the McV benchmarks. These benchmarks were just published recently, and they're going to be one of the first elements that we build into the website. And some of these benchmarks or performance measures, as we're going to start calling them going forward, are really important, and we want to make this resource available as soon as possible. And so during the process of building out the website, we're going to make sure that the performance measures are really a top priority for us so that we could point to that resource to our colleagues doing work in different communities. Something that I get very excited about is the implications that social media can have for a website like this. I've used words like interaction and crowdsourcing and getting people to help us build this resource. And that's how I envision social media really being used for the compendium for version 2.0. So several elements of the social media interaction are going to be around blogging. There'll be a certain blogging page that will, retain chronological notes as they're entered into the blog so that it becomes a repository of information organized by date. But that will give us an opportunity to send out notifications to whomever has subscribed to that blog that, this measure was used in this community and we felt it was good. This measure was used in this publication and the results were this, and that means so on and so forth. And so that blog really gives us a tool to be in real time working with colleagues and try to be on the cutting edge of what work is being done and what measures are being used. So that's a very exciting element that was not at all a part of the first version. And so those are some of the high priorities for the redesign. Ms. Michelle, you could go forward one more. And so a lot of what today is about is learning about opportunities to get involved with the TRC. And I would like to invite all the callers to consider becoming a part of the Measures Compendium Community of Learning. Anything like a website really needs to go through a battery of testing. We need to know that the navigation is fluid, that it's intuitive, that all the links work. And so we'll be doing some very pointed and targeted testing in the spirit of Think Aloud protocols. And for those of you who aren't knowledgeable about Think Along protocols, it's something where myself or Nancy would give you a goal to accomplish on the website. And we would not give you much instruction beyond the particular goal. One goal might be to find a measure associated with language development, and that was used in an American Indian community. And so the user then would give us feedback in regard to the decision process that they have for clicking on each of the links that they go. They'll be at the home page and they'll say, well, I'm scanning for language development now, and so on and so forth until they reach the goal that has been defined through the protocol. Now that gives us a lot of great insight into how users perceive the website and how they think it ought to work. And it also gives us some quantifiable data in terms of the number of clicks and the duration of time it takes to accomplish a goal. Now those are key pieces here, because if a resource is difficult to use, users are not going to be determined to find that solution in this resource. They'll go to a search engine like Google, which works very well. And so we have to be in the mind of thinking that we need this resource to be fluid, quick, and efficient. And so your involvement in this particular community of learning would include some of these beta testing elements. And we're looking at the timeline of between March and July for the bulk of the work to happen. And to refine that timeline a little bit more, as I mentioned on the previous slide, I'm building out the performance measure benchmarks at this time, and that'll give us a good idea of the layout and the appearance of the website. And then we'll go into a phase where we poll or question our different communities and our different colleagues about measures that, one, are already in the compendium, and two, what measures you feel that need to be included into the compendium. And as you can see on this slide, this community of learning will be co-chaired by myself and Nancy Whitesell. Are there any questions about this particular community of learning? Well, thank you for your attention, and I look forward to working with some of you on this important task for the TRC, and I think that this version 2.0 will be an improvement, and it'll take advantage of some of the social media outlets that we can use, and I hope that it will become a hub for researchers working in adolescent development in American Indian communities.
I do have a question, if it's okay. So the Think Aloud is a user assessment. Is it also going to be accessible?
In terms of what type of access for
American Disabilities?
American Disability Act?
Yeah.
We can look into that. In fact, that's important consideration considering the funding.
If it was being built at Michigan State University, it would be required in order to meet the legal requirements, current legal requirements of the American Disabilities Act, because it's a public document. So you better check that out.
Thank you, Hi. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Brad, for sharing that. And again, Jessica will be following up with a survey after this call. So if this is something you might like to get involved with or be willing to be one of those beta testers, that's a place you can let us know about that. All right. So let's see here. I'm going to talk just briefly about the TRC Summer Institute at Johns Hopkins. So back in 2013, we first developed and delivered a class, a 2-credit graduate level class called Early Childhood Research with Tribal Communities. And we delivered it again in 2015, and we'll be delivering it again this summer. The course will review developmental theory and research methodologies relevant to early childhood and tribal communities. But the research methodologies really are methodologies that can be applied, in many different ways, not just early childhood. And the course will have a specific focus on community-based and community-engaged approaches to research. The goals will be to provide students with an understanding of early childhood development from that frame of Western scientific developmental theory, and we also really have as a goal to focus more heavily and bring in a focus on both indigenous ways of knowing as well as indigenous theories, if you will, of early development, how culture and language, for example, influence early development as well as development across the lifespan. We will provide students with some understanding of the basic elements of research design. Again, particularly the community-based participatory research approaches in tribal contexts. Students will get a sense of what it means to develop a research question, select methods that will answer that question, and then how to use research and data to inform early childhood programs and practices. So again, we've delivered this course twice before. It's always been a pretty large group of students, probably about 40. And students who come to the Summer Institute at Johns Hopkins is a much bigger effort, not just what the TRC is doing, but it's really an opportunity to engage with tribal students from across the country. It's probably one of the few courses or course settings where, it's just a given that the students are themselves Native or have long histories of working very closely with tribal communities. So it's a nice environment to network and to be around people who are working in similar settings that you all are. And so we're going to be revisiting our syllabus as we do each time it's offered, and again, really thinking about how to highlight tribal language and culture and indigenous methodologies. And so, as I said, it's a graduate level course, and students get 2 credits at Johns Hopkins. So to take a graduate level course, though, you need a bachelor's degree. There are options, though, to take the course as a non-bachelor degreed student. You just would not get credit, but you could still take the course. And so anybody can register for and take the course. It is in person in Baltimore. It will be, I don't know if I said this on the last slide. I didn't yet. It is the week of July 10th through the 14th. The course will meet every morning from 8:30 to noon. And as we've done before, we were going to have some scholarships available. Those are competitively awarded. We'll be sending out some information by March 1st on the application materials and procedures at tribalearlychildhood.org. And those scholarships include airfare, lodging, and tuition to take the course. And in the past, we have involved some of our tribal program partners. One year it was Ann Cameron, who's on the line today, and another year it was Patty Brown, both our Head Start partners, who came to the course, were there the whole week, and served as discussants and small group facilitators. So we're part of the course faculty, so we'll be looking to probably do something like that again this summer. So any questions on the Summer Institute before I move us along?
This is Hi again. Does developmental theory, that's sort of a really big general term.
Yeah, it is.
Does that include systems, concepts, and epigenetics?
So we would love to involve you, Hi, in getting your comments on the syllabus. You know, one of the challenges in this course is that we try to cover a lot in a little bit of time.
I bet.
And so, you know, how the course can really be kind of a high-level scan of, you know, developmental theory, quote unquote. Research, I mean, both of those are, I mean, multiple courses in and of themselves, right? So really trying to strike the balance of kind of an introductory level course that will give people a sense of the range, some range of some theories, ranges of methodologies, you know, so would love to, we're going to be putting our heads together on how to, you know, revise our syllabus. Bob, who's on the line, has been a presenter, and he had the tall and vexing order one year of, I think, presenting all of developmental theory in 45 minutes or less. So anyway, would love to work with those who are interested in thinking through that syllabus and you know, really how to meet our target.
Glad to help.
Actually, I thought my experience was a good one, actually. I mean, it was a very struggle to get to prepare it and figure out what to do. But I had some good feedback from it from a number of the students. So it's doable in a way.
Okay. Well, we will definitely be looking for your input, and may also be reaching out to some of you who may have taken the course as students.
Right. Michelle, this is Kathy. I'd love to hear what you do about that.
That would be great.
Bob and Hi want to add. I love systems and epigenetics, so I'm cheering for Hi's corner, but I can't imagine presenting all of child development in
45 minutes or less?
Yeah.
Well, Bob found a way to do it. No. So,
as always.
But again, you know, balancing And I think this is something that has manifested in our NCRE conferences as well. But how do we draw from the broader non-tribal literatures, and how do we, learn the important lessons there are to be learned there, and knowledge to be gained, but also, of course, bring in indigenous ways of knowing and theories, and particularly around culture and language. Okay. So speaking of NCRE, and I'll try to keep us moving here, we are hosting that, and a save the date will be going out soon. September 28th and 29th. This is your save the date for those of you on the call, here in Denver. Again, with the TRC of the next 4 years, we're moving NCRE to an every other year conference just because of, just mindful of the resources that we have available to sponsor the conference. So we'll have it in 2017 this fall, and then we'll have it again in 2019. And it'll be here on our campus again. The NCRE Planning Committee is starting to meet this month. And the broad theme, and we really need to focus in on what this means, will be on culture and language and development. And that idea of focusing on culture and language and development, we know that it's of keen interest and central importance to all of us, whether we're researchers or program partners or evaluators. But it was also driven in part by ACF and a desire to bring in and connect to some of the work with the Administration for Native Americans that funds language and cultural programs in tribal communities. And so ANA, we haven't had a chance in the history of the TRC to work super closely with ANA, but we look forward to connecting to that work that's happening as well. And so we will have, again, NCRE student scholar program, and including student and community scholars that would provide support for both students and their community partners to attend NCRE and connect with senior research mentors. So anyway, we're really looking forward to this year's conference and hope that many of you can join us again. I'm going to move on to the social network analysis, and I'm going to turn this over to Jessica Barnes. So one of the things, just to say before Jessica takes the helm, is that, I'm sure all of you who have grants know that evaluation and measuring the extent and nature of your success in what you're doing is central to having grants. So we see the social network analysis as being an opportunity to really document what we feel is one of the things at the core of the TRC, and that is partnership. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes, so as those of you who have been a part of the TRC for a while know, we conducted a social network analysis of the TRC probably in I think it was the second or maybe the third year. I think it was the second year of the first round of TRC funding. And we were able to examine some interesting aspects of the structure. It was a good view of what the TRC network was at the time. The TRC was only comprised of Head Start and home visiting at the time. Now we have child care, so it's a third component. So we thought that for the second round of TRC, it would be nice to have the social network analysis be built in to the TRC as something that we do on an annual basis, so we can see how the network changes and grows over time. So as a part of that process, we thought it would be fitting with the way that we do things in the TRC to have a group of people who are interested in this. We know that we have some community partners who are very interested in this topic, come together to be a part of the guiding the work of conducting that social network analysis. So What you see on this graph is, in this slide, is the graph from one of our initial graphs from our TRC social network analysis that I spoke of. And so next to that are the list of the things that we need to do in this work. It's one of the first things we want to get started. We want to define our team, inviting any one of you who are interested in this work to join us, so that as we determine what our research questions are, that's driven from our TRC representatives, and then we'll develop our plan. I'll finalize the survey based on our research questions. We'll launch that survey, and then I'll pull together the data, analyze it, and then as a team we will look at what those data are saying, interpret the data, understand what they are telling us, so that we can prepare our final products from that. And then if you can move the slide, thanks. So some of the types of questions that to keep in mind that we can possibly answer with these data are questions about how the network is structured. So these are more descriptive kinds of questions. So what does that network look like? Is it comprised of one well-connected network, or are there multiple loosely connected networks? We can see from that initial network, from the first social network analysis that we conducted, that at the time it was one well-connected network. There were some divides. You could see that home visiting partners and child care and Head Start partners tended to cluster together, but they still comprised one network. And we were also able to see that researchers and community partners were kind of interspersed throughout the network. So there was no real divide, whether or not based upon the type of partner that you were in terms of being a researcher or a federal partner or a community partner. So those are the kinds of things that we can look at. We can also look at a big thing that we want to look at for sure is how that network changes over time. So now that we have the 3 different program types, and we have also added these other types of partners into the mix, being more mindful of and involving in more intricate ways our research partners and our organizational partners. So how has that changed the network, and how will it change over time? We also asked in the prior one questions about how individuals function within that larger network, and we can look at questions, especially now that we have all these different communities of learning that have functioned and are continuing on in their work. Do they form stable subgroups? And also, are there characteristics of individuals that predict those network connections? So something that we can look at about how individuals might play a role in the larger network and what that means. And then we also would like to look at questions regarding what participation in the network means for individuals. So looking at whether or not participation in the network, whether that means the community of learning or the steering committee, leads to different types of research engagement or research innovation in tribal communities around early childhood. So again, we really would like to know those of you who are interested in that, and the survey that I'll send out as soon as this call is completed will allow you to let us know what you're interested in. And it really should be considered more of a poll because it's so short it really shouldn't be considered a survey. But
thank you, Jessica.
You're welcome.
So any questions for Jessica before we move on to just a quick preview of what is coming up in year 2? So I realize, we talk about year 1 as if it's all in front of us. We're actually approaching halfway through year 1. I'm sure that all of you who have grants know how quickly time moves and how easy it is to get behind on your timeline with the initial startup work. So with all of the year one activities that we talked about just now, we really have to be mindful of getting those up and running and moving along to stay close to the timeline we had set out for ourselves. So thinking ahead to year two, that year two actually starts essentially October 1st, technically September 30th. But so year two starts this fall, right after NCRE. And so just a really quick preview, the Native Language and Culture Community of Learning, building off of the momentum that there will hopefully have been from the NCRE conference theme of tribal language and culture and development. We will be putting together and inviting you all to participate in a Native Language and Culture Community of Learning. And that community of learning will really determine what are the activities, but some broad level activities that group could engage in would be, really understanding and articulating and documenting, at least in these Western scientific ways of understanding and documenting roles of Native language and culture in early development. And I say that because for those of you who are engaged in research or who look to the research literature for, say, articles written, that address tribal language and culture in early development, there's just not a lot out there for people who are looking in that particular literature. So that might be something that this community of learning could focus on, is how to add our collective understanding and knowledge to that literature base that so many people access. We might focus on identifying constructs related to tribal language and culture in early development, and starting to get our heads around when you have to measure those things that in tribal communities exist and work, but maybe don't have measures per se, that sometimes you're called to use again in your research or your work and programs. What could we contribute around identifying and developing measures related to language and culture? And again, as I said before, how can the work connect with what is happening by ANA grantees across the country, and the aims and missions of ANA in general? So, and then the other big thing in year two of the TRC, starting this fall, will be accessing the AIAN Head Start FACES, that's the Family and Child Experiences Survey, data for some secondary analysis. So those of you not familiar with Head Start FACES, FACES is a long-standing descriptive study of Head Start that's been happening since 1997, but it has never been carried out with tribal Head Start programs. Tribal Head Start programs are part of Region 11 of the Office of Head Start, and there's about 154. Those grants go to federally recognized tribes. There's about 154 of those Region 11 tribal Head Start grantees. So this study was planned by a work group of tribal Head Start program directors, researchers, federal partners, and then our partners at Mathematica who carried out the study, with 21 of those federally recognized tribal Head Start program grantees from across the country. It yielded a data set of about 800 children and their parents who are served by those programs, the majority of whom are AIAN, but not all are AIAN, because Region 11 tribal Head Start programs also serve non-Native children in their communities. So the data, it's a relatively large data set considering the dearth of information in the research literature on young tribal children and families. And so there's data from the tribal program directors, teachers, classrooms, and of course, again, the children and families. And so this group will convene and identify priorities for analyzing those data. So in terms of staying connected and dialogue and responsive, just, in between those specific community of learning activities, we have our website that we're needing to update. We have a small team here, and sometimes our website gets neglected, but we know it's important as the face of what we do. So we'll be working on updating that. It's the same website we've had for many years now. We'll be attending some upcoming conferences that some of you may be at. The Child Care and Early Education Policy Research Consortium, which is in March in D.C. The Federal Reserve System has a Community Development Research Conference focused on early childhood in March in D.C. We'll be attending the Society for Research and Child Development in April, and then NISHDA meeting here in Denver in June. We hope to have a presence at the ACF ANA Tribal Grantee meeting in August in D.C., and then the NICA meeting in September in Tulsa. In terms of ongoing, dialogue, we also are connected with the NISHDA and NICA boards and have, make ourselves available to join their calls that they have throughout the year to provide updates. And then, like I said, we'll be starting some webinars, probably starting up in year 2. And we're open to other ideas. That's something probably our steering committee in particular could help us brainstorm around. So in terms of next steps, we've mentioned several times a survey that Jessica will be sending out. So Jessica, I'll let you talk about that for a few minutes.
Sure, and I definitely don't think I need a couple of minutes to talk about it, but
Okay.
I'll take it. So the follow-up survey, here's the link. I will also send a link to each of you on the call in probably about 15 minutes for you to take that link to the survey to answer the questions. Again, it takes most people less than 5 minutes, some as few as a minute and a half to complete the survey.
All right. Well, I saw, Lana, you typed in a comment here, and you know somebody who might be, interested or a good person to connect with on the tribal language and culture. And so, yes, Lana, please do email us. And everybody, if there are particular individuals that you work with in your programs who you think would be great to get involved in the work of the TRC, please do email me and let me know, and we'll be happy to connect with those people. So, go ahead.
If Lana, if you don't mind sending that information to me as well about the language and culture person, so I'm in the process of gathering all of our kind of pre-research for that. That would be really helpful.
Is that Jessica?
Yeah, that was.
Okay.
Thanks.
So, Lana, you also asked for a copy of the slides. So, Jessica, I'll make sure you have a PDF copy that you can send out with that follow-up survey. And I will add to the slides today our contact information just so you have that handy. We've presented, everything that we had set out to share. Just want to pause again before we conclude. Any questions or comments? Well, again, thank you, everybody. It's a lot of information to take in. We really appreciate you tuning in. We hope that you got a sense of some ways that you could get involved, or that others would want to get involved. And we just look forward to really starting to dig in. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.